Buddy, welcome to Friday. Glad that you could make it. My Facebook hasn't come up yet, but I think it will. Today we have Angela Fehr. Angela is from Canada. She's a brand ambassador, fabulous artist. Angela, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to be here, John.
It's great to have you here. So I always ask the artists before we start, do you want to have questions asked of you as they occur, or do you want to have them at the end? What's your preference?
I am happy to answer questions as I go. Absolutely.
Okay. So if you're on Zoom, you can ask Angela directly. If you're on Facebook, we will read your question to Angela. So I'm sure we have a PowerPoint presentation. Ethel, can we see Angela's PowerPoint presentation?
Please. We'll do a share screen. Just a quick reminder. I know we are, and we're happy to note that there's many of us in Zoom today. Just need some help. If you could help mute our microphones first. And then perhaps later, whenever you have questions for Angela, then that's the time that we could unmute our microphones. Thank you. Okay, let's do the PowerPoint now. Here we go. We start with this. I always say that we want our guests to quickly follow our guest artist, today Angela's social media accounts. Of course, Angela is in Facebook. She's also has an Instagram account and more updated videos up on her YouTube channel. And the next couple of slides, Angela, will be your sample artworks. And yeah, it would be best if you could share a line or two about each of these. We start with this one.
Happy to. Yeah. Okay. So one thing I really love is getting to know a subject well enough so that I can start to improvise when I paint it. And that happens when I paint it many times. This was an example of just a little playful, I think I dropped some graphite powder kind of down on the center of the painting and a mountain emerged. So that was shortly after a hike that we'd taken in the mountains here in northern British Columbia. So I was inspired by my location and by what the watercolor and the paint and the graphite were doing together. Yeah, this one is actually, this is, I'm taking you into my home here. Just to the side of my studio, I have a hill. My husband he actually hired someone to kind of build a hill between our house and our neighbors so we could feel like we lived all alone in the wilderness. And when I climb up onto that hill, I have a beautiful view of the valley surrounding our town. And watching the sky in the summer change is one of the most inspiring things. I love to paint it. So this is one version of that summer view from this side hill beside my house. This is, how do I describe this? I'm going to make you feel like I never leave my home. From my house, we have a little country road that I walk down every week, a couple times a week. And if you and I were walking down that road together towards the river, which you can kind of see off in the distance, this feels to me like late fall when just like now, when all the leaves have blown off the trees and the world is kind of turning a violet and various shades of kind of a raw sienna and brown. I don't like to use the word brown because brown is never just brown. But I walk along that road. You and I would walk together and I would point out, I've painted that tree, I've painted that view. This is my home and it's what I love to paint the most. Okay, now this one I have to tell you, I am not really sure if this is my view from my local area or if it's actually from a reference photo I took on a trip to Ireland. I was kind of painting the two scenes at the same time. And I thought it was so fascinating how the more I painted those two locations, how they started to kind of blend together in my mind. I saw connections between the landscape of Ireland and the way the sky touches the land and the way I experience my home area. And so somewhere in the middle, this painting emerged. And you can see it's one where I was really challenging myself to be bold in my brush strokes and in my shapes. And I love how it evolved that way. This one, again, I'm coming home. My landscape is low hills, it's trees, and all of the things in between that connect it. And I love exploring how pigment pulls all of those shapes together. I love that band of lavender in this one that kind of, it's kind of trees, it's kind of hills, it gets to be a little bit of both. And because every landscape is symbolic of what we see and experience, we get to be a little bit rebellious, maybe. I like to be a little bit rebellious with my shapes and leave them a little bit obscure like that. Every time I look at this, there's a little voice inside of my head that goes, Angela, you should add another layer of detail to that painting. But there's something in me that loves the texture in this. There's a lot of hematite burnt scarlet, which is an amazing color. And the kind of blurring between what's land, what's sky, and what's river, those things make me really happy. And so every time I look at that painting, even though there's that little shame voice that says, make it understandable to your audience, there's also a little happy voice inside of me that says, you did just what you wanted to do, leave it alone. And then I get to enjoy that texture. Last year, or maybe the year before, we had neighbors who did some really kind things for us. And I really wanted to thank them by giving them a painting. They live on the edge of the river. You can see those river hills off to the right. And one day my daughter texted me, she was feeding their pets. They were away on a trip. And she said, you have to come over here and take a picture of the sunset. So I did. And then I worked for probably a year on various versions of this scene, trying to pull it together in a way that kind of captured what we love about that location, what they love about their home, so that I could gift it to them. And this is actually a study of the larger painting they received. Still kind of my favorite. I just love those pink hills.
Yeah.
And this one, I think this is probably our last one, Ethel, before we move on.
Yeah.
This is actually going to make a mental note of this one. It's actually going to inspire a little bit of my exploration today. What I tend to do is I get a little obsessed with a reference photo. And on my screensaver was this photograph of the forest in autumn that I'd taken several years ago. And it just popped up on my screensaver the other day, and I thought, why am I not painting this? So I pulled out my paints and I've started to explore this particular reference photo, trying to capture that feeling of fall, and also challenging myself to see what different ways I could interpret it, using the reference photo as my jumping off point. So I really like this version. And when I have a version that I really like, then that gives me permission to be playful and experimental with future variations of the same scene. So I thought we'd play with that today.
Excellent. That's fantastic. Those are nice.
Thank you.
Yeah, very nice. Does anybody have any questions for Angela before she starts?
Angela, how big are those paintings?
Well, let's see here. Most of them fall in, I'm thinking, between quarter sheet. Usually I'm really enjoying starting to work a little larger. When I teach, I often paint on a half sheet of watercolor paper, but today I'm going to be painting on a quarter sheet, and it does tend to be the easiest to pull out and just get started on a painting.
Beautiful work, beautiful colors. And do you paint plein air?
I do somewhat. I'm getting into it more. I feel like plein air is, for me, the opportunity to kind of attune my observation skills and not necessarily come out with a great painting. And because our weather, our season of good weather is so short here, I do tend to do a lot more studio painting.
Right, I know that. Beautiful work, Angela. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
I wanted to ask you how you transitioned into this loose style. I wanted to do that, and I watched people.
Yeah, it's a big transition. When most of what I shared today in my paintings was landscapes, and that's surprising to me because a few years ago, I really felt like I could paint loosely with florals. That was easier to improvise, but realistic landscapes. I mean, there was too many things that I had to make look like things, and it's really encouraging to me actually looking at my paintings and realizing that I have developed a loose style that works for landscape paintings. But I also have almost alongside of every loose landscape, I have a tight version that was a lot more dependent on the reference photo. So I see the process happen every time I choose a new subject, that I have to learn what I can let go of in order to be able to let go of it. And that it is a process. So sometimes I'll do 20 versions of the same scene before I have one that really feels like it was the release, the letting go of detail that I wanted to see.
So you start with a more literal interpretation and then you loosen up gradually, like becoming more and more an abstraction of the same subject.
Yeah, I do. I think I often work with NOTANs or value studies to try to loosen up, to get to see the value patterns is really helpful, to see the major shapes. And then I really love kind of blurring the edges and letting things flow together so you're not sure where one part ends and another begins. So that's a challenge. I have to So doing the research, doing the value study, doing the NOTAN often really help, but I don't always do those first. Sometimes I kind of need that little kick in the pants of doing a literal version to remind me to take a step back and to play with abstraction. And I almost feel like once I can put the reference photo away, I've painted it enough times that I'm not staring at the reference photo anymore, then I start to feel a little more free to improvise. The other thing I often tell people is I try to let go of all my shoulds and have tos. So if I'm struggling because my reference photo shows that there's a road or something, and I'm trying to get the road to look like it's going off in the correct direction and it's just not working, sometimes I just have to challenge myself and say, well, what if I let go of that road completely? What if it didn't have to be part of the painting? And whenever I let go of things that I feel obligated to put into the painting, usually that's a key to loosening up for me.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you.
We have a question on Facebook from Buffy Kaufman saying, Angela, love all your beautiful color blends, connecting shapes and transitions between foreground to background. Can you speak on how much water works into this wet on wet loose style of yours?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm going to demonstrate that today. I usually start on dry paper, so often it looks like a wet on wet style, and but I start dry and then I start to introduce water and blur those edges. I often will place shapes, place edges, and then release them with water. And so I'll be demonstrating that today. As well, when I build it up second and third layers, generally I want them to melt into that first layer. I want them to look like they've been there all along. And so I introduce a lot of water to soften edges through all of the stages of the painting process so that everything looks really blended together.
Angela, with regard to your whatever you're working on at any one time, is there a specific paper that you go for?
Right now in my studio, I've been using, most often I'm ordering Arches. I have some Saunders, which I feel like it's a little bit softer. And I'm not always, I feel like the texture on that works better for larger paintings. I also just recently started trying some of the Balhong paper, which I'm getting to know a little bit too. But as long as it has to be 100% cotton. I want that good texture and I want flow, and I don't get that with the cotton blends. I feel like the paint just moves more intuitively on 100% cotton paper.
Thank you.
We have
Angela,
some more questions.
would you like to start? Because I don't want you to run out of time.
Yeah, I would love to start. Let's, yeah, if we can just we'll switch over to my work surface. I'm happy to answer questions as I go, and I'll really try to describe my process so that any questions that are coming up to do with process, we can cover. Before we start, I'm going to show you a couple variations that I've already done so that you can know that I've done some research first. So if what I'm doing looks intuitive or effortless, part of the reason is because the research has happened and I've been able to do some loose variations. This is one I think I was playing with a little bit yesterday. Here's another variation with even more soft edges. I'm really liking the kind of lost edges of the trees here. This one I changed up my colors a little bit. This one feels a little more moody. And so that was, I'm liking the addition of the cobalt blue there. I'm making mental notes of the things that I like so that I can do them in future versions. Here's another one that I did I think I was working on this yesterday as well. And one thing I'm really paying attention to, and you can watch for this as I paint, is the pattern of darkest darks. There's a darkest dark shape here, and then these little connecting darks that bring us across the page. And then there's a little bit of shadow along the bottom of the painting as well. And then I also want to focus on the light that's moving up through here. And then I have one more. John's video yesterday, as you were looking at the luminescent and shimmering, just the different reflective and refractive colors. So then I pulled out my iridescent russet and had to play with that a little bit. And then I also grabbed a watercolor stick. I think this is the lamp black. And I doodled with that a little bit. So it was being a little more experimental than I have been up to this point. And so that felt fun. When I've been painting a subject many times, like I'll be doing today, is adding another version to this series, I need to make sure I don't get into a rut and I'm boring myself with the subject. And so I always want to be willing to change direction, bring in a new color, change my shapes, whatever it takes to get me excited and really focused on being present through the painting process. I'm also going to bring up my reference photo here. Oh, dropping paintbrushes already. I think I should be able to share my screen and just quickly show you the reference photo itself. I wanted to show this to you because it's a beautiful photo. I can't do a painting that's going to look just like this photo. So I want to do something of my own. I don't want to try to match what I see, but I want to be inspired by it. And if you squint at this photo, you can really see the pattern of light. I love the dance of the golden leaves. And this actually makes me want to leave right now and just go paint, or actually just go sit in the muskeg swamp. That's where that photo was taken, in the swamp where we go cranberry picking in the fall. It's just the most beautiful place and it smells good. And if you're lucky, you might see a moose. So of course I want to paint a place that's so magical for me. I just used my spray bottle to moisten my paper, and I just kind of moistened it in a pattern along here. You're probably not going to see that. See if I can get a little shimmer going on, a little reflection so you can see a little bit of the water there. I also do have a little value study here, and this is going to be what I'm going to be looking at as I paint, not my reference photo. So we'll put that over here so we can all see it just a little bit. And okay, so my palette is moistened. I've spritzed it with water, and the colors I'm using are actually 18 of my favorite Daniel Smith hues. I have a little dot card listing them, and you can find this, I believe, on the Daniel Smith website, a list of the colors in my dot card, even if you don't have a dot card. And I'll talk a little bit about them while I paint. I want to start with the light, that golden light. So we're going to grab some golden colors. I'm going to grab some Nicolezo yellow, and we're just going to throw a little path of light, just following the spray of water that I placed. Nicolazo yellow is a wonderful color because it has a little bit of a whoosh to it. If I touch that onto wet paper, it wants to move. And if I add a little water, it's going to follow the water as well. And then I'm going to add another light, another yellow, and that's green gold. I'd always think of green gold as a yellow because as it dilutes, we really start to see just a beautiful kind of, would it be a cool yellow? And we're going to encourage that to move a little bit too. There were lovely green sunlit trees here, which I think the green gold could really work well to show some of those young spruce trees. We'll put a little bit of green gold there. And
Angela, what is your surface?
My surface?
Mm-hmm.
I'm on Arch right now. I think this is a cold press 140 pound paper. And I've just taped it to my painting board. I'm going to use another yellow, and that's Aussie Red Gold. And this one's a little bit darker. We're going to spatter this time. And this is why everything in my studio is covered in dots. You should see my microphone and my laptop, and yeah, it's all it's all covered. Let's add one more color to our thinking sunlit leaves. We'll add some quinacridone coral, and I just have it in a little separate palette well, because it's not in this travel palette that I have here. And I'm going to follow the Aussie Red Gold with a little bit of spatter with the quin coral.
Angela, is that a Chinese brush?
This brush, no, this is a handmade brush. I believe it's made in Oregon. The artist who makes these is Tracy Lebenson. That's Lebenzon. And he makes these brushes in his workshop. And you can find those on his website. Okay, so I'm just going to add a little bit of water. After I've placed that first few strokes on my wet and dry paper, I have a combination of softness and edges. And so at this point, I really want to encourage the softness. So that means I have to release some of my edges. And the spray bottle helps me do that without me stirring color around with my brush. One reason I really like this brush actually is because the bristles are so long. I can use the side of the brush, or I can use the point of it to get a really fine line. So it's a lot of fun to use. I have a question about stretching my paper. No, I do not stretch my paper. I just tape it down. I'm always in too much of a hurry to get to the fun part of actually painting, to do much prep. And I've really tried to create a painting process that works for what I enjoy the most. I think so often it's easy to feel like we need to do things the same way some other artist does. And we take all the fun out of it when we start to do all the things we think we should do to be better. Truthfully, showing up and painting is really the best way to grow skill and to figure out what kind of artist you want to be. Do the things that are most fun for you. So I'm just bringing in a little bit of lavender right now to kind of indicate some sky. And my water is really starting to fill the page. There's a little bit of dryness here and a little dryness on this edge here, but I'm starting to get much more of a wet and wet approach. And I've been thinking about my light values, the sunlight falling on my scene, but I want to now start thinking about the shadows in my scene. And I had a lot of fun yesterday working with Rose of Ultramarine as my underpainting for my shadows. So I'm going to do that again. Sometimes I go straight to a darkest dark. Rose of Ultramarine, I don't think any of us would think of it as a darkest value color. You know, it's not a near black, but it worked really well to kind of bring in some cool color and to start to form that underpainting. And I'm tilting, I think you can see I'm adjusting my angle as I paint. I almost don't even think about it. You know, I just naturally kind of am noticing the pools of paint and water on my paper and wanting to encourage some of them to just move with gravity and come down the page. And, you know, that's a time and experience thing too. The more you paint, the more you start to get a feel for what the painting, what will happen at the different stages of the drying process. And I'm going to bring in a little bit of darkest dark here. There's going to be a big tree kind of coming up the side over here. So we're going to throw a dark down there. There's more trees kind of off in the distance over here. So I'm going to still use the rose of ultramarine, but I've got a little less of it on my brush. So we're just going to encourage that to kind of suggest the shape of a more distant tree over there. And now we've got a strong dark shape. At this point, my painting could almost become anything I wanted it to be. You know, we've got some very soft edges. We've got a pattern of darks and lights, but I don't have anything telling us that, yes, these are trees and leaves and so forth. And the only thing that's telling me that is my imagination. And so as the painting evolves, I want to notice what's happening on the paper, and I don't want to fight with it. So I'm just going to slow down right now. I've worked really fast to put a lot of paint on the paper, and everything's quite wet, quite moist. And at this stage, I want to kind of be present to see what's happening here. The rose of ultramarine over here is kind of starting to separate. The quinacridone coral, there's a little spot right there that's really pretty. I like this little pattern, even though there's a lot of white there. And I'm a little hesitant to leave crisp white edges anywhere because they can sometimes look like a missing tooth, really draw your eye. There's a strong white shape here. There's another strong white shape here, which I might decide to soften out. But as I'm noticing what's happening, I don't want to try to force the painting to do anything it doesn't want to do. So if something's pretty, at this point, I want to just notice it and leave it. Right over here. Yes, go ahead.
While you're waiting for that to set up a little bit, can you show us that amazing palette to your left with the 100 colors?
Yes, I can do that. It's covered up today because my dot card colors are in this little travel palette. I brought this with me to Italy last year. But in this palette, this is my studio palette, and you can see it's on a turntable. And it holds actually 64 colors. And then if you take out this insert, you can put more palette containers in. And I like this because I'm actually going to update it in a few days. There's a few colors that I don't use very often that I'm going to swap out and try out some different hues. But I like it because it's arranged like a color wheel. The only thing that's hard with the color wheel palette is where do you put the browns? So I do have my browns over here, but they're kind of wedged in there. And I really like the fact that when I'm working with this big palette, I'm not going to use all 64 colors in one painting, but I can pull out the individual hues that I want to use and grab 5 or 6 and work with them in my painting. So really like this palette. It's made by Robax, R-O-B-A-X. Robert Baxter is the engineer who designed it, and it's just pretty ingenious. And it holds a lot of paint in those big, deep palette wells. You can see, you can fit a whole tube of paint in one of these.
Wow.
Angela, sorry.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. Okay, as we've been talking, I just want to get in close because this is a big part of my painting process. Is, of course, the color changes as soon as we get close to the camera. This is a big part of my painting process, is really noticing the beauty of what's happening in that wet, in those washes as they flow together and, you know, get to know each other. And I want to notice that and really be present to enjoy that beauty. I might mess up. I might add a lot of darks and lose all of this beautiful magic. But if I get to witness it in the painting process, then I'm really valuing myself as an art appreciator. I might be the only person who sees this painting in its most beautiful moment, and then I might ruin it. But there's something profound in being able to be there and enjoy it, regardless of whether or not the painting turns out. That's what I like to tell myself anyhow. And then if my painting doesn't turn out, maybe I don't feel quite so terrible about it either. I want to think about, as we're slowly noticing the painting, I want to keep painting. I generally don't like to stop and let everything dry completely. And often with watercolor, you can keep moving. It's drying at different speeds in different areas. So you can see this mark I just placed is actually staying quite crisp on the one side and then flowing into the yellow on the other. We get, it's a lot drier over here than it is over here. So this is a good place to keep painting as the painting is slowly drying in different speeds in different places. So I'm going to just tickle in a little tree over here. And I feel like by its color, it's kind of a tree that's maybe in the middle ground. We've got this big dark tree that's going to be in the nearest foreground. And then we're going to have some trees in the background that are going to feel a little more shadowy and give us a sense of depth. But I want to have trees in the middle ground as well. So I'm just going to keep softening the shapes here as I want it to blend into the scene. So I'm drawing out that little mixture of, it was green gold mixed with, I think, a little bit of phthalo turquoise. And up here where the lavender is damp, you can see the top of the trees kind of disappearing. I'm going to use my brush to pull some of this color that I've just placed. I'm going to pull it around. And let's maybe bring in something interesting over here. I'm going to grab a little bit of zoisite. I like zoisite. I like to think of it as a dark green. I don't know if it's described that way on the website, but to me it's a green. And I often mix it with other greens to get a beautiful textural dark, earthy dark. So we're going to just dot a little bit of zoisite over here. I'll use it in other spots in the painting. Once I've added it in one place, I know I want to bring it in elsewhere. And the other thing we can do to make that tree kind of belong in the painting is use some of our darkest dark that's along the edge of the page here. Bring in a little bit of Rose of Ultramarine. Oh, I like that. We're going to leave that spot and just let it blend in. Something I'm not loving is this bloom that I'm getting along the edge. I'm just debating if I want to do anything about it or not. I think what I'm going to do is use a little bit of kind of sticky Rose of Ultramarine. Kind of that, it's not a very runny consistency. That's what I mean by sticky. And I'm just going to soften that edge a little bit and pull a little bit of that dark color across.
While
have
you're
any
working
idea-
on that, would you be willing to answer a question on Facebook about the backgrounds? Felicity Hansen has asked, could you talk a little bit more about your philosophy on the backgrounds and working wet on wet? Felicity Hansen on Facebook asked a little while ago, working wet on wet, how do you avoid backgrounds or do you incorporate them somehow?
I have a philosophy, kind of a philosophy. I don't know if it's a good philosophy, but I kind of like to think about, I don't like to use the word mistakes. We often have things happen in our paintings that we don't anticipate. And so often we want to, I used to paint with paper towel in my other hand so that as soon as something happened that I didn't think I could control, I could blot it up and, basically start over. And over the years, I noticed I had a lot less use for my paper towel. And I think a lot of that is because I was learning how to work with mistakes or unanticipated outcomes rather than panicking and lifting them up. I would rather take something, an unexpected thing that's happening in my painting and find a way to make it belong in the painting than trying to eliminate it. It means this little bloom over here, I tried to notice it so I could soften it out. It's not completely gone, but it's a lot weaker. It's not as strong at this point. Do I have another example here? There's a little edge here that I'm not sure is pretty, and I'm letting it sit there. As it sits, it's actually drying. It's getting a little bit paler. I don't have to panic over it, but I do I do want to just be aware that that's an area that I want to, bring something else in as I'm painting. And so often I think we rush to resolve something when slowing down actually gives us a few more options. So for me, I think letting go of urgency, not everything has to be the way I planned it to be. Oh, I'm bringing in a little bit of Aussie Red Golden spatter, and my brush was wet. So there's a couple of little blooms that are dripping onto the paper just as I speak here. And they're actually really pretty. And that's a really good illustration of what we're talking about. I just dripped water on my painting right here. It's creating some tiny blooms. Instead of thinking, oh, I made a mistake and I've dripped water on my painting, I'm noticing how pretty those blooms are and how they're bringing texture into the painting. And I've actually grabbed my spray bottle and I'm going to put a few more little drips of spatter right over here. Oh, that's really pretty. Timing is everything when it comes to introducing a little bit of watermark. And I like these fine little spattered watermarks a lot more than I like this big large one. But I almost always like to think that there's a way to make something work in your painting rather than just trying to eliminate it completely.
Angela?
And it's growing that assurance that I can make something beautiful happen even when unexpected things are happening.
One of the popular questions that people ask is, do you use any other kind of like special tools like a credit card or anything unique?
Oh yes. Truthfully, if I want to, one thing I like to talk about is I'm kind of a rule follower. I like to be a good girl and not ever color out of the lines. And so in order to have a loose style for me, I need to remind myself that I'm allowed to do whatever I want and that I get to be brave. And so, and that's hard to do when I'm, on camera doing a video or something. But I like to bring in anything that's going to kind of shake up my process and make me a little bit bolder, push me over that edge to be braver. So trying to think, do I have an example I can give you right now? I had a little piece of string, and I don't know if it's here. So one painting I was doing one day, I just didn't feel very satisfied with my paintbrush. It wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. Every brush stroke looked so controlled and rhythmic. So I took a little wad of cotton string and I dragged it through my paint and I started slapping my paper with the cotton string. And it was completely uncontrolled. Another tool I'll use is this little brush right here, which came from the hardware store and cost me less than $1. And this little brush, let's put it in the Rose of Ultramarine. If I drag it into my painting, I don't get to control the brush strokes that it makes. It's going to push me out of my comfort zone. And so I love to choose tools that remind me to be brave. When I was teaching, an art and travel workshop in Italy, and we were walking around painting plein air, and I was feeling anxious. I was teaching a group of students that I needed to be a good example for, and it was causing me to tighten up and be very tense in my painting process. And so finally, I just grabbed my gelato spoon, which of course was in my hand, and I dragged it through my paint and started trying to put paint on the paper with my gelato spoon. And those little things that seem so silly and playful remind me that when I'm painting, I get to be brave and do whatever I want. And that's where my joy comes from when I'm painting.
Very
This
nice.
I'm liking right here. This brush I really like because I think you're seeing that it can put a lot of paint on the paper in a hurry, but it can also make some really nice little marks. I'm getting this rough edge. I'll try to get closer so you can see it, so that it's going to create some spiky strokes as I drag it across the page. Working with a stickier paint can really help with that as well. So I've got a little bit of the pure zoisite on my brush right now. And I'm just gonna bring in a little bit of some evergreen tree shapes to give us some context.
We had another question here. It was a direct message to me. It says, how much does Angela pay attention to transparency of colors?
Oh, that's a good question.
That's
I would
from
say,
Matt.
yeah, I would say that I like to the quality of your paint color is a big factor in how the paint's going to perform. So if I'm just going to start building up some darks over here. When I was first painting, I really liked using transparent colors because anytime I would work with a semi-opaque color, a semi-transparent color, it would start to get muddy right away. I was doing a lot of mixing in my palette wells, whereas now I do a lot more mixing on the paper. And so anytime you're mixing, like Aussie Red Gold's a good example. If I'm mixing it with other colors, it's going to be a kind of a semi-opaque. But when I use it pure on my paper, I can let those washes flow and blend with other colors. And I start to see that kind of magic start to happen. Getting to know a color means you start to internalize what it's going to do as you're painting. And then you get to work with its characteristics without even really thinking about them. So another good example is lavender. It's quite opaque as well. And I'll use it in the first layer of a painting, and I'll also use it towards the end, maybe with a little bit of spatter to bring some light values in, even over a dark wash. And it's really fun to see what it does in those two different roles. And I've learned how to kind of rely on it to do its magic because I've used it so many times and in different contexts. So whenever I'm learning a new color, I want to not just do swatches, but I want to, in fact, I almost never do swatches. Instead, I want to just start painting and really watch what it does when I mix it with other colors, when I use it on its own, when I dilute it, and when I use it pure and rich. And that's been the best way for me to kind of learn, fill my toolbox with strategies for using different colors. Okay, so right now I need to slow down again. And often that's a part of the process, just reminding myself to slow down and notice what's happening. So right now we've got that strong big tree on the side. It maybe feels a little bit too purple. I'll be thinking about whether or not I like that. I've got kind of two suggested trees in the middle ground, and I really haven't done anything with those shadow trees that I want to place in the background. And I haven't done much with the foreground. In fact, those first washes of light color, I'm running low on time, aren't I? I'm having too much fun here. I like this area, but it needs a little more texture and depth. So we're going to just dive into bringing in some of this texture. I would like to do some background trees, but I don't, right now the paper's not going to be receptive to the shapes I want to place there because of the kind of dampness that it is. So that's something I need to wait on, and I don't want to rush it. But down below here, it's a really good time to bring in a little bit of texture and depth. And actually, I'm going to switch brushes. I don't really like the spatter that this one makes, but I can choose another brush
Angela,
that I know plays a little bit better when I slap it on the page. So I'm going to bring in a little bit of green gold. The first color that I place usually tends to disappear under the successive layers of color. So the green gold and the Nicolezo yellow have really blended into the background. And we're just going to kind of bring them back a little bit here. So a little green gold in here, maybe a little bit over here. And I want to bring some in there, but I've got these beautiful pools of color that have kind of trickled down from the shapes I've already painted. And I think I can work with that. So this is where I would bring the spray bottle in and do that blending that I talked about, where I like to see all those layers kind of integrate with each other.
Angela,
Yes.
What spray bottles do you use? I'm having a lot of trouble with mine.
Yeah, and they're all different. So unfortunately, this one came from my local grocery store, and it's like an independently owned grocer. So I don't even have a brand name.
Okay.
So I can't
Yeah.
help you there. But truthfully, I would go to like a dollar store and just grab a variety. I feel like this one's from Hair Product, and it's more of a mister. So if I want a mist, I'll use this one. But and then I have one that was made by, I think, Norwex. And this one I use for wetting my palette and waking up the paint before I start painting, because it has so much force to it that I don't want to blast my painting with it.
Yeah.
So this one is the perfect spray bottle because I can squeeze half a squeeze and it will kind of rain on my paper with just like some little drops of gravity. Oh, beautiful things are happening right here. Look at that.
Yeah.
So, okay, so here's the problem that we have as artists. As artists, we're supposed to be wielding a paintbrush and making all the decisions. And when a magical thing like that happens, we immediately think that we need to go in with our brush and fuss and add intention to it. And I would suggest that, a big part of our job as artists is just knowing that we shouldn't touch the pretty things sometimes. And we shouldn't also make those things too precious. So let the paint do what it's made to do. Like there's some beautiful edges happening over here. There's these little rivulets of color over here that I don't know what they are. Could it be twigs and shrubs, or I don't know, but it's pretty, so I'm going to let it live. And that's really what I'm fighting to remind myself of, is that when I'm painting, I need to get out of my own way and let the painting be beautiful all by itself. And that's why I keep reminding myself to slow down. This is a combination of Moonglow and I think Zoisite, which is kind of weird to mix those two together, but I think it's going to be beautiful. And we're just going to trickle in a little bit of darks there.
Angela, people would like to
Yes.
know that cool gray thing that the painting is sitting up on.
Oh, it's just a dish drying mat.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. So
That's
yeah,
bad.
I think it's, from just the local big box store, Walmart or whatever. It's really nice because when I'm working, I've got this trickle of water coming down here. Sometimes I'll use a lot of water. If something's happening that I really don't like, I will just wash my painting in that area and just let the color move. In fact, sometimes when I get too fussy and too controlled, I'll even wash away a piece of the painting that I like in order to remind myself to let the paint do beautiful things. So I need
Angela?
something underneath to absorb that moisture. Yes.
Okay, so it's just for the absorbent. It's not to add, you don't wet it first to add humidity to
No.
your environment.
No,
Okay.
I don't. No, it just catches all those puddles of color. The other thing I found was when I'm painting on camera like this, it's nice to have a neutral backdrop under your painting, just for the camera to try to get as good of color quality as I can. Okay, so let's just play a little bit with spatter, and then I'm going to call this painting basically ready to stop. I don't know. I can never decide if something's done until after I've kind of come back and looked at it with fresh eyes, but I can stop it almost done and trust that when I come back, if there's a few more brush strokes that are needed, I can do that then. Most of the time when I feel like a painting's almost done, it's basically done and I just need to stop. I'm going to add a little bit of spatter. I really like this edge right here, and I don't like the shape of this tree quite so much. So I'm going to see if I can mimic a little bit of that shape over here and kind of camouflage the brush strokes, those shapes that I didn't like quite as much.
Angela,
Yes.
do you use things like sponges for texture or salt or anything like that, or is it too much overkill in this kind of painting?
Salt or sponges? The main thing that I really try to do, and I kind of alluded to it, is I really like the look of something being organic. I like a brush that takes a lot of the decision-making power away from me. Sponges, I feel like when I'm dabbing a sponge, I end up moving in such a rhythmic way that it doesn't look natural.
Right.
So I always want to use, and even with salt sometimes, like trying to scatter salt onto my painting, I'll end up with this really, it looks clunky to me. I want to blend it. So if I'm using salt, I'll usually go over that salt, the salt spatter with a wash of color, a glaze of color later to kind of blend it in. I really want, I love the beauty of if you're walking down on the beach or something and you see that scattering of driftwood that just looks like art, even though you know that it was just cast up on the shore by the movement of the water. I love things that are just that natural beauty that looks so organic. And so I want to make my paintings look like that. And so I do try to use, to take a lot of that control away. You know, I'm introducing spatter. This is cobalt teal blue. Really pretty texture right in there. Those are a little bit kind of too bright. Maybe we'll blot just to send them backward a little bit. And so that's why I'm working with my spray bottle and releasing shapes and letting them flow. There's a beautiful trickle happening right down here. I think you can see that. There's absolutely gorgeous, oh, it's so pretty. Look at that texture right there. So ideally, when my painting is done, and I really think I should stop here. Once it's done, once it's dry, I want people to notice it from across the room by those strong value patterns. And then when they walk up to it, they take the time to look. They're the people who get the gift of seeing the texture, seeing the flow, and just noticing the beautiful things watercolor does all by itself. And, you know, that's why we're here. That's why you and I paint in watercolor, is because we're standing here witnessing such beautiful things happen. And we just get to be kind of an instrument that works alongside that beautiful watercolor. So I'm going to let this dry.
Sorry.
Happy
Is
to
there an
answer more
optimal
questions.
angle that you
I'm
put
sorry?
your paintings at? Is
The
there
angle?
an optimal angle that you find is best for doing this type of painting?
I'm not sure about that. Right now, I have it up about 1/2 inch. I've got this little ceramic brush rest, and so it's just sitting on that. But I sometimes find that I'm tilting it right up against my water containers, so it's several inches up. And if I'm painting really big, because sometimes I'll try to do something that's like 3 feet by 4 feet, most of the time in order to see that well, I have to be almost vertical. So I think it's more a matter of certainly moving, tilting so I get that excess moisture rather than having it pool in the middle of the page. So it's more of a idea of being attuned to what's happening on the paper so that you can adjust.
Gauging it as you go along.
Gauge your responses, I think. Yep. Yeah.
Angela, there is an interesting question here. How would you recommend we improve our ability to create the value study, like the one you just created, to use instead of reference photo? I struggle with lights and darks and where the shadow comes in.
That is a good question. I'd love to hear if anyone else has a suggestion. I often felt like I was never very good at value studies myself. Mostly, one thing I've noticed is I'm pretty lazy when it comes to drawing. So anything that I can draw in 30 seconds or less, that's what you're going to see on my paper. Squinting at your reference photo can really help, because then you're blurring the edges and you're looking for how everything kind of flows together. That helps a lot. And there's even apps now that will do that for you. You know, you can blur your photo in photo editing, or there's the Notanizer app that people use, and that can also be a tool for simplifying your reference photo so you can see those value patterns. I like to think about my photo as being about one, or my painting about being as about one thing. And in this case, you know, it's looking for that path of light and creating that contrast between light and shadow. So, you know, when that's what I'm focused on, then the other stuff doesn't matter so much. and you can give the painting a little bit of freedom to evolve the way it wants to.
Thank you so much.
We did have a question about the tape, if you want to share.
About my tape?
Yeah, what kind of tape it is.
I wondered about that because this tape, when I was traveling last week, I needed masking tape. I was going to do some painting and I hadn't bought any. I bought some at an art supply store, and it was the most expensive masking tape I have ever bought. Most of the time I just go to the hardware store and buy that basic beige masking tape. This stuff is a lot thicker. I don't think it's as sticky. But I don't think I would buy it again. I mean, at $20 for a roll, it's just not worth it. So yeah, whatever gets your paper to sit basically flat on your board, that's what matters. So if people are finding it's too sticky and wants to tear the paper, you can get it a little bit linty first by pressing it against your pants. Lots of people do that. Mostly I find that once I'm working with that first wet wash, the cheap masking tape will start to let go after a while. But, you know, second and third layers, you're not using as much water anyhow. So you can feel free to let your masking tape take it off and just work in those smaller areas on the paper.
I know so many people want to know so much more about you, and on the Daniel Smith website, if they go over to the artist section, they could read your Q&A, which was really insightful. Where else can people know more about you?
So yes, I do have my own website, angelafehr.com. That is probably the best place to track down links to anything you want to know that's up there. It's on my website. I am on social media as well, on Instagram and Facebook. If you look up Angela Fehr, I'm not hard to find.
Angela, being as you've finished, I would imagine.
Yes.
I will ask you the question that we tend to ask. I guess, when do you know when you're finished?
What is the quote? A painting is never finished. It just stops in interesting places. You know, as artists, I think we've quickly realized that we don't have all the answers. Sometimes I wonder if I stopped a painting too soon because I was afraid that I was going to ruin it if I kept painting. Sometimes I went too far and I did ruin the painting. It's hard to know if maybe there was more I could have done to make it better. And I think knowing that we're never going to know is a good way to approach a painting. And then I try not to make a judgment on a painting while I have a paintbrush in my hand. I want to come to that painting next week or maybe in a month and say, how does it make me feel today? And the paintings that, you know, are the most, I'm the most proud of are the ones that bring me joy every time I look at them, even years later. And that's only something I can know as time passes. Sometimes
do you ever go back in retrospect and touch paintings up at all?
I have one on my wall right now that I've been meaning to unframe and fix, you know, and I don't think I ever will. It's not really something that I do. Somebody else on one of these demos commented the same thing. He tended to paint all his paintings in one session, and if it didn't get finished in that session, you know, he would move on. And I kind of like that. I think I'm a lot the same way.
It's of the moment, isn't it? It's like a photograph.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe.
Angela, I just want to say that back in 2014, I started with my tubes of my little watercolor set and found you, and you have been integral in my painting journey because I started out with you not knowing diddly squat. And I think you were in the blueberry stage and the lilac bushes and stuff. And thank you for your generosity way back then and now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think about, you know, there are artists that inspired me to be brave. The whole reason I can be a loose painter now is because I saw someone else who trusted their audience and was willing to show how much they loved watercolor. And so, you know, I made me want that for myself. And so that's what we want to do. We want to inspire each other to be the artists that we really want to be deep down inside and not worry about being right or wrong.
There was a lot of those comments throughout Facebook and here on Zoom. A lot of those testimonies of how you were there first and they're still painting.
Yeah, I don't take those comments for granted. I know how much that mentorship meant to me when I was starting out. It's really valuable.
Yeah, I've been with Angela 14 years and it's been an amazing journey. And I'm glad she's back.
Thank you.
So Angela, will you actually, when you're finished,
Mhm.
whenever that time comes,
Yep.
will you post your artwork so we can all see it?
So yeah, I feel like I'm going to call this one finished. Let's just, I'll show it one more time. But now, of course, it needs to dry and let some of the magic is still happening here. We're getting some beautiful neutrals and I want to show them under good light and close up. So yeah, I'll be posting this and sharing it as well. But right now, yeah, there's just there's a little kind of murky rainbow right over here that, oh, I just wish you could look over my shoulder with me and get up close to it. Beautiful colors.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us today, Angela.
Thank you.
And thank you everybody for joining today. See you next Thursday.
See you next Friday.
Thank you so much. It was
Thank
wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Wonderful.
Bye.
Thank you, Angela.
Bye all.
Good to
you
see
next week.
everybody. Thanks, Angela.
Angela, bye.
Thank you.